Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Keeping It Sporty podcast. As always, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or on our website at keepingitsporty.com. On today's episode, I am joined by a very special guest. He is a sports analyst, senior producer, and sportscaster who has worked for various companies, including CBC, CTV, Sportsnet, and TSN. He is also a teacher in the RTA community at Toronto Metropolitan University, where I have the pleasure to attend, and I've had him as a prof as well for a camera class this semester. I welcome to the show the man, the myth, the legend, Dan Berlin. Dan, or Professor Dan, how's it going?
Hey Elias, everything's going great. Super glad to be here. I can certainly address that I am the man as opposed to myth and legend. Hopefully, by the end of today's session, I'll be able to absolutely live up to both of those monikers. But it is great to be here and great to connect with you in the audience today.
So you've had an illustrious career, working basically everywhere, as I just mentioned in the introduction. How did you begin your journey in the sports industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one at that. And I will say, that when I look back to being even a child, my love of sport was undeniable. One of my first memories was as a 6-year-old, following in literally my father's footsteps in 3 feet of snow, crossing through a park to get to a subway to have him take me to my first Maple Leafs game when I was only 6 years old. And then having the opportunity to just have an insatiable appetite for consuming sports my entire life, to the point where I used to get in trouble for trying to sneak upstairs at midnight as a 7-year-old because I had this, burning desire to watch Monday Night Football every week. And, I would get in trouble, but my parents were more kind of amazed that here was this 7-year-old that, wanted to give them a recap of why the Browns and the Jets was apparently the most compelling matchup of the week. So this started to really come honestly to me. And just to fast forward, I actually spent my 25th birthday in Australia, where I had a great passion for baseball. And I played a lot of baseball growing up, baseball through my high school years. And while I had some opportunities to pursue colleges in the US, that didn't really pan out. But I did pursue baseball in Australia as a 25-year-old and had a wonderful experience, and then came back only to find out that Sportsnet had just launched. And one of my close friends from high school was working at Sportsnet as an associate producer and introduced me to the production manager who eventually hired me at an entry-level position as a broadcast associate. And that's really where I got my start at Sportsnet and had a chance to, over my 11 years at Sportsnet, work my way up into a producer and senior producer role while also having the chance to do some on-air work as well. And when I ultimately finished my 11-year tenure at Sportsnet, covering all-star games, covering Super Bowls, and just having this incredible experience being around sports and athletes and telling their stories, ultimately I started to consider what a career change could look like, and that led me to become a professor while still being able to capitalize on my sport media skills and passion as well. So, at least in a nutshell, that's kind of how I got my start, Elias.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting that around the time that you were in Australia, that Sportsnet ended up starting, and you got. I guess they were really looking for people back then. Would you say that's correct?
I would absolutely agree. And, back in those days, there was a lot more upward mobility to be able to grow there than maybe you see now. Sportsnet, of course, has established itself as really the number one network in Canada. So, the opportunity to go from a broadcast associate to a senior broadcast associate to then becoming an assignment editor to a producer to then, a features producer and a field producer while doing on-air work. I had a chance to wear a lot of different hats and to really be able to become a versatile professional, and certainly, wouldn't have traded that opportunity or experience for anything. There really was a lot of opportunity to get my foot in the door back when I did.
And how would you say, I mean, the industry has evolved over time? Because there's definitely been a lot of changes throughout the years, and then especially leading up into the pandemic, of course, with all the virtual space. What kinds of changes have you witnessed personally over the years?
Well, I think the single biggest change comes down to the fact that anyone has the opportunity now to create content and be able to connect that content to audiences. And in some cases, there's actually more opportunities through more organizations to be able to do it. When I broke in, you looked at a Sportsnet, a CBC, or a TSN, or back in those days as well, the Score. And those were like the holy grails of being able to work in sport media. You either had an opportunity to get a job in one of those places, or you weren't working in the industry. Now, and of course, all of these networks, and back then, even the newspapers at that time, the Toronto Star, the Sun, the Globe, had robust sports departments as well. And all of these agencies were the gatekeepers for the stories that audiences wanted to hear about. Local stories about their favorite players on their favorite local teams, or the coverage of national leagues like baseball and hockey and football and basketball, and certainly later on, the growth of soccer and more, and women's sports. But I will just say that now what you see are teams and leagues now hiring professionals to help them tell their stories. And now we see even bigger players entering the scene, the Netflixes and the Apple TVs. And now we see how we consume content going through a major change where, back when I broke in, it was newspapers and it was linear television. And now, of course, it's streaming and it's just changing in terms of how we now need to be able to find where the audiences are to connect. So that's kind of the biggest change I would say from a landscape standpoint. But what hasn't changed is the desire to hear great sports stories. So whether they're told first person by the athletes themselves or by sports tellers and content creators like yourself, Elias, a burgeoning, content creator, there's probably more opportunity than ever to be able to tell good stories. Now, what it really comes down to is how you can build an audience or be a part of a group that has a built-in audience to be able to really magnify and be able to um, broadcast that message in meaningful ways. Kind of like your Keeping It Sporty podcast, right? Like this is such a great platform to do it. And I'll just finish by saying I think what we're experiencing right now with the growth of women's sports is incredible to see. One of the biggest changes I would say, and it's certainly one of the primary reasons why I got into teaching at within the RTA Sport Media program was because I wanted to be someone who could help promote a change in the culture of sport media. When I came through, it was male dominated, and in some cases, that domination led to a masculine toxicity, male toxicity, or toxic masculinity would be sort of the proper sociological term for how these organizations operated, where women did not have a place at the table, and it was such, a clear and distinct um, lack of diversity amongst the people who were working at these networks. And that being said, we've seen a tremendous amount of change, both in how women's sports are being received to by all as something that has a tremendous value and deserves to receive a place of legitimization alongside male sports where it suffered as second fiddle for so many years. And part of the reason why is based on leaders and their lack of willingness to embrace women's sports on an equal and level playing field. So I mean, it's a long answer to a great question, which is to say that there has been great change, and in many ways, I would say the change has been very positive.
Yeah, I want to touch back on a few points. So definitely women's growth, women's sports rather, coverage has grown. And I think that that's very important. And as you mentioned that when you were first sort of getting into the industry and for a while, it was definitely male dominated. And so it's really nice to see this change sort of occur these days. The second thing I want to touch back on was certainly this day and age, it's hard to grow an audience. And I think that's the biggest thing that you kind of pointed out there, especially with podcasts like my podcast and others as well, no matter the medium. It's certainly hard to be able to grow an audience. So, in your opinion, how do you think that people can grow their audiences and can be able to push out content in a more effective manner, maybe we can say?
Well, I sort of look at that twofold. Number one, in terms of growing audience, you know, maybe those who find some success might have a built-in audience. Part of the success of linear broadcast networks is because that was where you had to go to be able to get content. That channel 30 or that channel 22 that, symbolized how you could find TSN and Sportsnet were sort of ingrained in how certainly I was growing up and maybe in your early years as a 2-year-old when you first held a remote control. But, so it's that idea of built-in audiences. So of course, athletes have built-in audiences, right? Teams and leagues have built-in audiences, and they might have a easier time being able to directly market themselves to consumers. Now, Elias, to your point, if you now look at yourself as a third-party person who's trying to build an audience, I mean, of course, it comes down to, marketability, the uniqueness of your brand, and when we talk about, marketability, is it something that maybe fills a gap within the landscape? And additionally, really marketing efforts are a great way to help stand out. The consistency, not just in producing the podcast, but how you would potentially look for meaningful ways to connect that podcast to your audience on a regular basis is also part of the strategy required to build audiences. But as we know, of course, there's the virality of having something that maybe just does go viral and does put somebody on the map, whether it's through TikTok or through YouTube or otherwise. That is one element, but I think what you're speaking to, Elias, and I'm sure you would agree, is that, building an audience can be very slow and somewhat, difficult to gain traction within a landscape where there's a lot of competition for eyeballs and for ears as well.
Yes, definitely. I think that's one of the biggest things that that you just touched upon is the competition. It's difficult these days because it seems like new podcasts are popping up and there's big podcasts that people tend to listen to as well. And so it becomes pretty difficult for, I want to say the small the little guy almost to be able to be successful, but it's all about building up your brand. I totally agree with you there. I also wanted to touch back on one more point that you made regarding streaming services. So we've seen Netflix, for example. They've had the Logan Paul versus Mike Tyson fight streaming on Netflix. They have some Christmas Day games at the time of this recording, some Christmas Day games coming up with the NFL. Do you think that's the way we're heading, where streaming services are going to basically more or less completely take over, and these companies such as Sportsnet and TSN, the original sports platforms, are going to sort of just decrease in popularity and more or less, I don't want to say disappear, but become a little bit smaller than what they are now? Do you think that's where we're headed?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, even Netflix just recently announced that they won the US rights to broadcast Women's World Cups in 2027 and 2031. And that's interesting, much like as these major players continue to accrue major rights deals, where I think we're going to see in Canada is sort of a protectionism in the sense that because we now have streaming and multiple new players emerging as part of the landscape, is what it could mean very well is that the sports nets and TSNs may just get a smaller piece of the pie. But I do believe that there will remain a piece of the pie for these networks. So, for instance, even if we just look at the Amazon Prime deal to take over Monday Night Hockey in Canada, for instance, as just one example of maybe in some cases where again, where are the audiences? Sportsnet is looking at, listen, they had a built-in audience on Channel 22 through linear broadcast, and what they see is, of course, every year more and more people are cord cutting. And that hasn't translated into more people or those same amount of people immediately moving to the app and subscribing to the app. So, from a business model standpoint, that's where this really comes into play. For the linear or legacy media companies, how do they continue to maintain their relevancy? Sportsnet partnering with Amazon and having this deal where they ultimately give up a piece of their pie so it can be shown on Amazon could be seen as a very strategic move as Sportsnet looks to maybe create new alliances that have the opportunity to help them from a business standpoint. But make no mistake about it, these major players that are digital first streamers have an advantage over legacy broadcasters because they've built something from the ground up that is ingrained and built into how audiences expect to be able to interact with that brand. And for Sportsnet, it may just not be as instinctive for people to say, oh, I'm going to go onto, the App Store and get the Sportsnet. Oh, and now you're telling me it costs this much in order for me to be able to just access the sports I want. And there's so much content out there that people start to go, hey, what if I had a budget of X number of dollars per month? Maybe it's not going to be Sportsnet or TSN as it used to be just an automatic as a bundle with your package. So part of this bundling is actually the next phase of what this ultimately will look like. And we are already seeing it on Amazon. And Amazon is probably most poised to position themselves as the future bundler. We already see it now. If you go on there on Amazon Prime's interface, you can subscribe to many different streaming platforms directly through the Prime platform. So they're already becoming an aggregator, much like Rogers and Bell were the cable companies that you had to subscribe through to get the services that you want. I think we're just starting to see some of these trends play out. But the one big thing, Apple TV Plus, Netflix, certainly Amazon, that we're starting to see enter into the sports rights landscape, they have built-in audiences, huge audiences, and they're driving the future of rights and what equates to, hey, if you're going to spend X number of hundred of million dollars on a certain sport, the biggest thing is that these companies, these media companies, want to be able to get a return on their investment. And, certainly when Sportsnet signed that 12-year deal over a decade ago for 2 or $5.6 billion, um, you know, being able to leverage digital rights and be able to figure out how to make that money back has probably been their single biggest challenge that they've had to face. Not the quality of their production or doing justice to the NHL and its product. I would say Sportsnet's product is second to none really in terms of and TSN of course also has a high quality of production, but these new players have built-in audiences and of course have deeper pockets. And that is where it might give them a competitive advantage. And the last thing I just want to mention, whether you talk about Netflix on Christmas Day, again, built-in audiences. People are home on Christmas and they want to watch sports. Or what I think is even more fascinating, we haven't even seen anywhere close to the full potential of this, was the creation of the Black Friday NFL game specifically for Amazon. Amazon actually believes that not only is there a built-in audience on Black Friday, but from a consumerism standpoint, more people are in a buy now mode versus Christmas Day, where they've kind of already spent on Christmas and maybe aren't as much in a position or mood to spend as they are on Black Friday. And as we start to see new immersive, interactive viewing experiences emerge, you have to start to think what the future of this Black Friday sportscast as a pilot for the rest of the industry can look like. Are we watching these games through headsets in a virtual or augmented reality place where, of course, we're getting personalized feeds and what it is that we're shaping the broadcast to look like, combined with the business aspect of integrating, the Uber Eats and the other companies that are creating this kind of holistic sports viewing experience that integrates all of these different partnerships to allow us to have kind of everything we want at the touch of a button. So anyway, I'm very curious to this, but that speaks to the landscape, and it certainly speaks to these new emerging players, the big players that are entering the scene.
Yeah, and to take it even one step further, you look at things like AI these days, and it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to play a factor as well in shaping the future of how we consume, how we watch sports, and maybe the amount of jobs readily available for people who want to be in this industry.
Well, I will say, AI, when it comes to a programming standpoint, will have a profound effect because to speak to these personalized viewing experiences, AI will have the capacity to be able to understand what it is you and I value in a broadcast and in real time have the opportunity to create a customizable viewing experience, whether it's statistically based, whether it's a sports betting standpoint, whether it's having an animated, fun family type of feed. Basically, when we saw the Simpsons football game, I mean, we'll look back on this and feel like how crude that is. But there very well could be an opportunity. And the NBA sort of introduced this at their All-Star game technical uh, gala just about a year and a half ago, that you'll have the ability to say, okay, I want to watch the Montreal Canadiens game tonight. I want everybody who's part of this to be animated as if it was Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse. And I'm looking specifically for betting odds in-game related to the Canadian players. And all of a sudden, like that's going to become what instead of me telling you what this broadcast is supposed to look like, you have the opportunity to shape it. What it does mean isn't the elimination of jobs and just to say that nobody will have a chance to work in the sport media industry. The skills that are valued, however, will evolve and change. So it is absolutely fair to say that a camera operator likely won't exist in the next 10 years, right? In terms of actually physically operating a camera. AI has the capacity to do that work. But I think more of the digital skills are certainly going to be, as we look at like content strategists and programmers, there might very well be much more of an element to the implementation of some of these AI tools in some cases versus some of the hands-on, actual practical um, development or production techniques that are actually taking place during the live events themselves. But I still think it'll be a combination of both.
No, I certainly agree with you. So, to add on to the accomplishments mentioned before, you've produced content for the Olympics, Super Bowls, Grey Cups, NBA All-Star games, MLB All-Star games, UFC events, etc. What are some tips to younger sport medians on how to break into the industry to attend and work these events? And once in, how to handle some possible pressure or adversity, would you say? I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but that's the question.
It's a great question. And I would certainly start off, by looking at, certainly identifying what you're passionate about and what, skills are in demand to make somebody, successful covering that event. Even though I had always had a desire to do on-air work, I started to recognize that the opportunities were more for me. This is my personal experience as a producer, and that being able to get work on air wasn't necessarily going to be my initial path to follow. So certainly one path is, if somebody is offering you an opportunity, say yes. Say yes to opportunities and also put yourself in a position to be able to say yes, where you're, you know, acting as if and looking to take opportunities to do and not just talk about a desire to do it. So as far as getting started, you know, we all need to make a determination and decision what it is that we want to do. And then as we start to now identify that objective, well, hey, what are some areas that I need to improve my skills in to be able to do that? It could be hard skills, production-based skills, or at the same time, any of the soft skills that speak to, your ability to communicate, how you can effectively write professional emails and connect to people and understand professionalism. It can certainly be, your ability to meet deadlines, your ability to be, part of a culture and be able to fit in well by being, both professional and courteous and have a can-do attitude. I remember speaking to somebody, close colleague of mine, it was a senior level professional at CBC, and the analogy they used was the ability to come up with ideas. Because certainly, if you're someone who can come up with an idea and then be the person who could then execute the idea and turn it into reality, that's actually something that's tremendously valued as opposed to just being the type of person that constantly needs to be just told what to do. And that doesn't mean that person isn't valuable and doesn't do a good job about being told what to do, but having ideas, story ideas, constant ideas, ideas that can be turned into reality that in turn provide value to a news organization or a production company is a currency that's valued. So, as I start to, even Elias, as you look at your podcast and think about here's an idea that you had that you brought into fruition and are doing it, as you say, it's helping you to build your brand. It's helping you to get, good reps in to be able to show what you can do and continue to kind of build. It's obviously from a networking standpoint, introducing you to people and helping you to, establish those important relationships. There's value to that for you. And it might not be paid, but, not everything that's valuable is compensated. Now, when you want to consider, hey, how can I break into the industry? Well, you also have to be thinking in terms of how you can provide value for them. And that's always going to be the way that we need to speak in terms of our skills. Excuse me. Our skills, when we apply them to create an impact and can then lead to results, is really how we need to be able to create a value proposition. So part of breaking into the industry and getting these opportunities speak to, okay, how you, A, create your ideas, that I can be part of a team and how I can integrate into a team to be able to meet the goals. I also have the opportunity to work with different equipment so I can be the person who has great versatility. I can build the graphics. I also have the ability to shoot B-roll, tell a story, script it, maybe even front it, and be able to edit it as well. That's why all of those skills are valuable because they provide something of value to them. And in many cases, it's not just a jack of all trades, master of none. It's jack of all trades, master of all. The more skills that you have, and the more ways that you can say how my skills can help you meet your goals, is really kind of that's the secret weapon in being able to get in. So part of it is also then understanding what it is that they value and what they need. So, talking to people within those companies and organizations, not just the hiring managers, but the people who are working as associate producers, the people who have their foot in the door there, and ask them, hey, what's really valued within this organization? What are you looking for? What would you say are those key skills that I should have that would make me marketable to a group like this? And they'll tell you things. And then you start to align yourself as the person who can do those things for them. And they'll be able to understand that, yes, you have what it takes to help them. And that's really how you kind of break in. That's how I got my start. I showed them I could write. I showed them I was a really good writer and I understood how to write a good story. Sorry about that. So much so that when I went into my first interview at Sportsnet, I took the liberty of writing a highlight pack for a Leafs game that had taken place the night before. And I remember the hiring manager saying, "Do you mind if I keep this so I can show it to our, broadcast associates?" Because I understood how to write a good story. And once I heard him say that, I was like, I got the job. He's taking what I'm writing and saying, I want to show this to everybody who works here. So those are just ways that you can create value. Show them not just what you can do, but what you can do for them. And I think that that's always the secret to breaking in.
And I think that this program, especially sport media, really allows individuals to really gain a plethora of skills, really, to be able to show, hey, I can build graphics as you mentioned. Hey, I can produce a show. I can direct a show. I can be on air. And I think that that's really important. So that kind of leads me into my next question regarding the program a little bit now. What's sort of the thing that you enjoy most about teaching and maybe just speaking to how the sport media program gives students the opportunity to learn and break into the industry.
Well, I think twofold, at least high level. Number one, we're going to give you, those core competencies, those core skills that you need to be successful to work in the sport media industry. What are those core skills? Well, it could be technical skills, it could be production, leadership, and decision-making skills. It can be team building and teamwork type skills that allow you to be effective at collaborating with others, which is so important. Of course, those writing skills that are fundamental to being able to tell good stories, and the presentation skills, right? Finding your voice and being able not even just to present in front of a microphone that you do so well, Elias, but more so just to have a voice to ask for the things that you want in your life and be able to be successful looking people in the eye and being able to have conversations, which are incredibly important in building rapport and making a name for yourself. We often say it's connecting to people who can connect you to the opportunities that you seek. And that's just kind of the other really kind of final piece of the puzzle with the RTA Sport Media program is there's so many industry connections through our faculty and our instructors and our alumni that without question also offers each of our students the opportunity to really meaningfully connect to people in the industry, which can, of course, turn into connections that can lead to real opportunities.
Yeah, I think that there are certainly a lot of great people, a lot of professors, a lot of faculty who certainly know definitely a lot of people and have a lot of connections. So I think tapping into those connections and really getting to know people and building that rapport with them is certainly important. I agree.
Well, listen, Elias, once you decide, and part of the whole university experience and what makes sport media unique is, listen, you get to try everything. You get this full this wide-ranging opportunity to try your hand at everything. And it's all grounded with an academic rigor and helping you develop critical analysis skills and understanding, you know, really the sort of the bigger picture of sport media. It's not just task related. It's within the bigger picture of society and being able to derive, meaning and be able to challenge our own inherent bias and all of the things that help to shape what the future of not only the industry, but our experience within that industry can look like. And there's a discovery element that each student and each of us face as we go through this program as well. So as you now start to uncover what it is that you like to do and what you want to do. And you also can understand why you kind of want to do it, how it might align with your values and culture. And of course, alignment becomes the compass for how you can seek opportunities. So I never want to diminish the importance. I'm so sorry I've got this weird tickle in my throat happening, but
Yeah, no
I
worries.
never want to diminish the importance of deciding what it is that we want to do. Like at some point, and we can do everything. We can do a lot of things, but part of it is sort of keeping an eye from even just a research standpoint. Where do no amount of lozenges that seem to be helping me right now. I'll try to start that answer over again.
No, no, you're good. Don't worry about it. Honestly, it's all good.
Well, yeah, I just, don't want this to be littered with me, hacking up a lung here. But um, so the point I was going to, what I believe is really important here is when you decide what it is that you want to do, and you can change this at any time, but it's like pick a direction. And in many cases, then the goal is to start to identify organizations where you can now enter into conversations to see about the potential for a mutually beneficial opportunity that you have something of value to offer them in terms of your skills and your persona and your professionalism, and they in turn can offer you something in return, an opportunity, compensation to have a chance. That's really at the heart of what breaking into the industry is. But of course, we never want to lose sight of the fact that whatever it is that we might be asked to do is an opportunity to show how we carry ourselves in that type of environment. And what I always found very thrilling about working in sport media was because not only was I able to tell stories about subjects and athletes I was passionate about, but I just loved the opportunity to be able to go in and talk sports every day. And following the passion is a big piece of this, no question.
Now, out of all your years of working in sports, because there's certainly been many events maybe that you can look back on, what would you say is your favorite event to look back on and say, wow, I can't believe I was a part of that?
Yeah, I would say for me, I had the opportunity to cover two Super Bowls, and that was, part of also recognizing that while a lot of my colleagues were very hockey dominant, hockey passionate people, and I certainly was. I love hockey as much as anyone I know. But I always saw there to be opportunities within our organization outside of hockey. It was to say that, one of the ways that you can break in is find something unique, whether it's your interest or something that maybe not everyone else can do or wants to do. And football was that for me. I've always loved football, dating back to that story of the Monday Night Football as a 7-year-old, and had a chance to produce our football content at that time. And that culminated in me attending Super Bowls 42 and 43 as our producer. And we produced some just incredible, incredible content every day. I remember talking to some of our senior producers and on-air talent saying, this is how you should cover a live event. And, it was such a privilege to be able to do that. We had uh, analysts from the NFL Network, including, Adam Schefter at that time and Rod Woodson and Jamie Dukes, who brought so much credibility to just telling incredible stories about whether it was Canadians who were part of those Super Bowls to just the big stories themselves around superstar players like Tom Brady leading the Patriots to an undefeated season to that point to talking I remember to the Arizona Cardinals and the opportunity for I guess it would have been Kurt Warner at that time trying to win another Super Bowl there. So really amazing. And I'll never forget standing on the 50-yard line after the Giants and the David Tyree catch and standing on the 50-yard line after that game watching Eli Manning walk past me in what felt like the Wizard of Oz. It was like everything was in Technicolor. It was like his helmet had the metallic blue paint and it just sparkled. And I remember him walking by me and I have ticker tape falling on me and I'm like, it almost just felt like a dream. And obviously both that Super Bowl where the Giants, you know, as major underdogs beat the Patriots to upset their undefeated season. And then the following year, when Pittsburgh beat Arizona, when Santonio Holmes made that incredible catch in the dying seconds to lead the Steelers to the win. Hey, those go down as two of the most memorable and legendary Super Bowls, certainly of the 21st century. And I feel very grateful that I had a chance to be there for both of those.
Yeah, getting to attend a Super Bowl is like, wow, that really puts everything into perspective. And like you mentioned about standing on the sideline and seeing everything firsthand, I mean, it must have been such a surreal feeling, like you mentioned. That's really cool.
Yeah, I like what you say there. It was definitely a moment where you feel like, you made it. I was like, it's the Super Bowl. I'm covering the Super Bowl, and it definitely felt like that. And I'll never ever forget it. And the whole week leading up to it is also, there's so many events. I remember something that was super fun looking back on was there a local event at the Chili's restaurant chain where they had developed burgers and had brought in NFL stars um, to, speak, just to endorse these burgers. So I went to the event. I mean, part of working in media, and we get a little chuckle out of this, is hey, if there's ever going to be free food, you'll usually find a media person there. And so, it was for a lot of reasons it was fun, but it was actually Adrian Peterson who was a rookie that year.
Wow.
I'll never forget Adrian Peterson was there and of course, his fall from grace is well documented, but at that time, I mean, he was kind of like Vince Carter was as a rookie with the Raptors. And I remember I had a chance to interview him at this Chili's event. And I remember asking him, hey, if you could be any kind of superhero, because I used to do lighthearted type on-air stuff. It was for a segment we used to call on sportsnet.ca. It was called Breaking Down the Wall with Dan Berlin, right? So the Berlin Wall and all that fun stuff. So I would it was akin to what Cabby had really pioneered and revolutionized, being able to connect with athletes and not ask cliche type questions. I remember asking Adrian Peterson, if he could be any superhero, who would he be? And he's like, oh, I would be the Flash. And he goes into this whole answer. And I just, those were really, really fun times. Just really, really fun times where I look back and I say, hey, you know what? I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do that.
You know, this is the perfect segue into my final question because it's a bit of a fun question, in fact. So I wanted to ask you now, who are some of the most famous, maybe members of the media and maybe athletes as well in your contacts? You had a little bit of time to think about this one. Maybe you did at least.
Yeah, I did. And I even, took a look through my contact list, which might be a little bit underwhelming, but I will say this. There is somebody I still keep in touch with to this day, and I would definitely consider them a famous contact. And this person usually in real time will get back to me within a minute, as of course their smartphone is generally an appendage, but it's Adam Schefter from ESPN. And Adam and I worked closely together for about, I would say, 2 seasons, where we had a weekly segment during football season. So about, really 20 weeks, including the playoffs, where I was the producer responsible for this 3 to 4 minute football segment. And I'll never forget, Adam paid me one of the highest compliments I could have ever received from anyone because one of the little um, I think what made me a very successful producer was because I always treated my guests and my analysts and their time as the most valuable commodity of everything. And that meant that I needed to be highly, highly organized and prepared so that when it came time for Adam to join us on, a remote feed for the purpose of packaging a double ender with Adam, that if it was 2 o'clock and Adam was joining us, we were ready to go the second he sat in the chair. And not once over the course of 50 tapings did I ever keep Adam waiting. And he told me at the end, he said, Dan, listen, I know I worked for NFL Network now with ESPN, but I've never had a producer more on point than you. And, when you think about the value that you give to others, I obviously held Adam in such high regard that, ever making him feel like he had to wait at my expense, that was just a level of professionalism that I would never fall below. And that was part of my brand and becoming that person who, hey, if you're going to work with me, I'm going to make sure you're taken care of and I'm going to take care of your needs. And to this day, I'll usually send Adam a note just on the eve of the football season to wish him well. He equates it to climbing Mount Everest every year, but he just takes it one step at a time. And, we've still maintained a great relationship based on, a mutual respect and love for football. So I'm grateful for that connection there for sure.
Professor Dan Berlin, thank you so much. It is honestly a great honor for me to be able to have you on my podcast to discuss everything with regards to the sport industry, hearing about your experiences. If I had 2 hours, I'm sure that we could have spoken for 2 hours about all your experiences, maybe even more in the sports industry because you're just, well, you have such an amazing career. So I really want to thank you for coming on to talk about that.
Well, Elias, thanks for having me. And I'll just, as a final word, the privilege and honor is as much mine as it is yours. As you realize, even with professional athletes, and I've had a chance to be with a microphone in front of anyone from Michael Jordan to Chris Webber and Vince Carter to you know all the hockey players that we grew up. Jose Teodoro, I remember having a great interview with him, and I'll just say this, you know people are people. And, I think you, Elias, really carry yourself with a great deal of professionalism, dignity, and tact. And I think it'll continue to serve you well. So, thank you for having me on your show. And I certainly wish your Canadians maybe a little bit more success.
That would definitely be nice for sure. But once again, thank you so much.